Henry, are you able to hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for coming. I think my switch to the Google Classroom, has maybe thrown some people off. That's okay. We'll move onward and upward, and people can get the recording. So
Good.
yeah, thanks for coming. So,
Oh, there's another one.
oh, sweet. Awesome. Hey, Mandy, I'm a little late, so we're just getting started. And I guess I'll turn on my video. I'm casual today. Okay, so we'll get into week 4 of our little series here on respirable crystalline silica. So we'll do another review of some of the things we've discussed so far, but we've talked about basic characterization. How do we tackle this? If we've used this NIOSH health hazard evaluation on dowel drillers as a sort of a frame for our this series and for RCS exposure assessment. And so if we were the ones at NIOSH who got the call, hey, we want help evaluating silica exposures to dowel drillers, how would we approach that? If they were like me, and they probably are actually. That's an interesting point. So I think we done a little early. We'll have time for questions, etc. But so I'm going to go on a little tangent. I believe that NIOSH attempts to evaluate or assess exposures that are interesting to them, something that they haven't done before. So when they get a call with a request for an exposure assessment, a health hazard evaluation, they if it's something they've done, something that they know a lot about, they're probably not going to do it. If it's something different and interesting, then they're more likely to. I'm not sure what all goes into that calculus for which requests they respond to and which they don't, but anyway, they have a decision logic there, and dowel drilling was apparently interesting and maybe new to them. So if we were in their shoes, what would we want to know about silica? What would we want to know about the dowel drillers? So some of that information we can gather ahead of time. Some of it is going to have to wait till we arrive on site and we put eyes and boots on the ground. We talked about our sampling plan and method. So, what are the different ways that we could evaluate silica exposures in terms of the measurement? Last week we talked about the actual sampling day. So, what does that look like? Calibration, things to look out for as we're sampling, things to be aware of. Today we're going to discuss exposure decision analysis. So we'll cover objectives, actually not as quick today. I do want to review, now that we have 3 weeks behind us, I want to give a decent review of the things that we've done so far with our little case. We'll look at their results and we're going to do a few simple basic calculations today and then talk about exposure decision analysis. And I am going to share some of the ways that I would consider communicating the results there. The My opinion on this changes over time as I think about it. I think there are certain things that should be in the report, but maybe shouldn't be in the body of the results section. Let's say maybe they should be an appendix. Some of the more technical details. Uh, for example, what is our decision statistic? A client that does not have a technical background probably doesn't need to hear about that. I guess if our well, we'll get to it. We'll get to it. But if they do have a technical background and they know what that means, then maybe we can just go ahead and throw it right in. But I'll share how I would approach that if they don't have a technical background. So we'll look at exposure decision analysis. We'll do a little bit of that for our case, the dowel drillers. We'll do a quick review and then preview week 5, actually. Week 5, that should be. So those who participate today should should be able to compare silica monitoring results with the OEL in terms of percent. We'll walk through that. Determine the exposure rating and control category. So that's from the EDA exposure decision analysis. I'm going to review the links for that for AIHA's course. Their free course, which I highly recommend if you haven't taken that. I think it's great. Cool tools that are available to everyone, whether your company pays for the fancy information management systems or not. I know a lot of those systems have tools built in already, and you don't necessarily you don't have to mess with these tools, but I like the tools, so I think they're great. And then you also be able to identify key findings and things that you might consider reporting to your client that come out of that exposure decision analysis. So, like I said, I want to review a little bit in a little bit more depth today what we've done so far. We talked about basic characterization. We talked about starting, so our basic strategy, if whether it's compliance or a comprehensive strategy. In our basic characterization, we decide what sort of TLV we're going to use, what is our decision statistic, and for us, whoops, that's our 95% UTL, which we talk about in the exposure assessment course or series I did earlier in the year, and AIHA talks about that in their EDA course again that I highly recommend. So we've been on exposure assessment for last week, this week, and some of week two. It takes a big chunk, and it's funny because a lot of times when people think of industrial hygiene, this is the part they think of, which it's a big part of the exposure assessment process. When we take the measurement and we compare our measurements and our results with our exposure limit, that is a big piece. It is the meat of the sandwich for sure, but it's not the only part of the sandwich. So we're still here, and week 5 is going to kind of skip over that a little bit and focus on controls. So we have our Dell drillers. We decided to break these two SEGs. Oh, we made two SEGs. So we have our backhoe operators and our drill rig operators. You can see the cloud of dust for the drill rig operator. This gentleman does have a PAPR, so that's good. That's good. And our backhoe operator is in an enclosed cabin. That's good. So we see some controls we want to see. We're going to make note of that. But still, we would guess from what we see here that the drill rig operator's exposure is going to be higher, maybe quite a bit higher. And we'll look at those numbers today. So we've talked about how it leads to silicosis. We picked those two SEGs. And for our purposes, we're going to use ACGIH's TLV. A little bit, I say a little bit. It's half of the OSHA PEL and half of what eventually will be the MSHA PEL at 25 micrograms per cubic meter. The most conservative, at least in America, the most conservative option for an exposure limit. At least of the widely recognized ones. So you could use a 37 millimeter PVC filter cassette with a cyclone. There are different cyclones available. If you've never sampled for silica, then I'd recommend just going with a PPI. And if you have a sample for silica, I would still probably recommend the PPI. I don't have stock in SKC or anything, but it's just so much easier. It does cost more money. It will cost you more money. The media has a fee associated with it, at least at the lab that I use. Maybe yours doesn't have that, but the lab will get the money whether they charge you up front or in the analysis. They'll get that money. But I believe that is worth it. Mandy says PPIs are definitely the way to go. I agree 100%. So yeah, great option there. I recommend it. We talked about that pre and post calibration. We're going to use that to get our average flow rate. And last time we talked about that. So that's how we get our flow rate. The pump should show us our sampling time, but I like to record the start and stop time just in case. Maybe I'm old school. Older pumps had more issues than the newer ones, but still I do it myself when I'm sampling. So you need that sampling time, you need the flow rate, average flow rate, so you can get your volume, which is going to go in your chain of custody. Remember, concentration is mass per volume. So the lab will give us this, they give us the mass. We have to provide the volume in the sample. Obviously, they will calculate that concentration for us and give it back to us on a report. So we're going to see, we won't see, NIOSH has their own lab. I have no idea what their own lab reports look like. I could share example reports. That's not necessarily important, but we will see what they reported in their health hazard evaluation. So this is table C1 from that Dow Drillers report. Real quick, we have 3 days. Let me change colors here. I guess hopefully the red isn't too offensive. So we have 3 days, day 1, day 2, and day 3. You'll notice that the backhoe operator is only shows up twice. There's a note down here telling us, well, there was a problem with the sampling pump. Wow, so NIOSH is not immortal when it comes to, they're not, their pumps are fallible, and they as humans are also fallible. Obviously they do a good job. I don't want to bash on them or their equipment, but that's it makes me feel good that, oh, I'm not the only one. And if it happens to you, you're not the only one. Stuff happens. That's real life. That's field work. So we can see here that for backhoe operators, well, we see sampling times. I wanted to point out, so we have respirable dust. We're not really looking at that. You can have them both sampled at the same time, at least if your lab does that. If they have that capacity, most do. I imagine all do. Anyone who can do silica could also do the dust as well. So you can get dust and silica at the same time. Now these are, th- these are not overexposures, but they're this one is fairly high. It's getting up there. It's still a third of the TLV for respirable dust, but still fairly high. You can see over here. So these are our silica results in this column. The top being the backhoe operator, and the bottom being the drill rig. You can see non-detect for the drill rig, or excuse me, for backhoe, non-detect for backhoe. You know what? I should Uh, I should have. I'll show you how to deal with that with exostats. If you're not already familiar with it, we'll talk about that. But I'm focused here on the drill rig operator just because those exposures are much higher. But we could play around with the backhoe operator maybe if there's time. I think there will be. So again, I'm going to focus first on the drill rig operator. So we've got 3 results from the 3 different days. Now we have a sample size of 3 for this SEG, a sample size of 2 for the backhoe operator. For fun, after we do the drill rig operator, and if there's time, we'll throw in numbers for the backhoe operator. So we've got these 3 results. We can see our sampling times. I think, well, let's see, let's take a look at this sort of cross asterisk. This sample lost approximately 90 minutes of sampling time throughout the shift. We suspect this occurred when the operator was sitting in the cab between drilling patches. That's the drill rig operator. So that sort of stuff happens. That happens. And it may have been that it got turned off by the operator, or the on-off switch got bumped. I don't know what kind of pump this was, but sometimes that can happen. He took a break, the pump got turned off, or maybe it was a flow fault. Could have been either of those things or something else, but probably one of those two. So anyway, and we'll make note of this. So they're saying it's 4 to 6. When we play around with the numbers for the backhoe operator, we'll just use 5. So normally, the method says 5. It can vary slightly. We don't know exactly which is associated with which sample, so we'll just use 5 for that. Anyway, so we see our results. You can see the PEL and REL as well as the TLV there for silica. That's what we're going to compare with. So real quick, this is their, well, we will perform the EDA, but we'll do that together. And we'll talk through all of these things. just this is from their report. So they generated this figure. I'm a fan. So this is the kind of figure that I like to see from my students. Mandy could say, "Oh, yep, probably." But anyway, so I like to see something like this with the two lines. So they've got a line here. Now this is for uh, I would recommend doing something like this where you have whether you're doing two different OELs or if you just say you just have the TLV. I would have a red line for wherever your exposure limit is, and then you could do a 50% line if you would like. It's not a bad idea, but it gives us an idea here. A quick glance, we can see, okay, we had one sample that was I would say way over. That's what I say is much higher than our exposure limit. If we're using the PEL, if we're using the TLV, then it's several times, well, not several, but at least a few times higher. And if we're using the TLV, which I would like to, then this one is over as well. So we're not starting in a great place. Our exposure decision analysis, honestly, is not going to be very interesting because these results are so high. But we'll do it anyway. It's good practice. So we're going to do both of these things. We'll estimate the percent of the TLV. If you're doing the PEL or something else, then just plug that number in instead of the TLV for each of our silica samples. We'll also estimate the geometric mean. So I'm not going to ask you to do it, but I will walk you through the steps. And we're going to compare the geometric mean as well to the TLV in terms of a percent. So it's a really simple equation. We're just going to take whatever our concentration was and divide it by our exposure limit. In this case, we want the TLV. I want the TLV. So divide it by that and then multiply by 100%. So I'm going to look at that highest exposure, the one that looked like it was a few times higher than the TLV. Divide 92 by 25. Then I multiply by 100%, and I get 368. So 300, we're getting close to four times higher than the TLV. That's, it's not good, not good. And we can anticipate what our decision analysis is going to say, but we know that we're not in a good spot here. So we're going to want to look at some different control options. That's for next week. We also want to estimate the geometric mean and then compare that with the TLV. So that part will be the same as what we just did, but if you're going to do it on a calculator, this is the way you do it. You could ask AI or use Excel. Both of those will do it more easily and it would be fine. And actually, the exposure decision analysis, so expo stats, I guess I'm not sure about IHDA. I'm assuming it will generate the geometric mean, but IH stat, the newer one, definitely does it. Expo stats does it. Excel does it. AI will do it. There are many ways you could get it pretty easily if you would like to do the geometric mean without calculating it on a calculator. Maybe I'm a little archaic, but anyway, this is what it would look like. You take your three results, multiply together, and then because there are three of them, one, two, three, we're going to raise it to the 1/3 power. For me, it's easier to remember to do it that way. You could take the cubed root. I don't know why, but it's just easier for me to remember this way. So this is the way I do it. So we multiply it together, we get a big number, 52,000 something. Raise that to 1/3, and that gives us 37.5. That would be micrograms per cubic meter. 37.5 micrograms per cubic meter is our geometric mean. And then we're going to do the same steps again to compare our geometric mean to the TLV. Those are a couple of numbers I would probably report to my client. So this one, 149.9, basically at 150. And then for our geometric mean of our samples, and then the percent of the TLV for each of my samples. So I'm going back. This one was 368. The 44 is going to be, what is it? That's going to be a little bit under 200. And then the other will be below 100. But those are things that I would include in my table. I'm not necessarily, I may or may not report that in the paragraph, in the body. Just kind of depends. I guess I'm not always consistent. It kind of depends on the client and the job, but I would definitely have it in a table somewhere. That's for sure. So this is just a quick reminder and uh, shout out for AIHA's video course if you haven't done it. Making accurate exposure risk decisions, because we're about to do this, and that course goes through this in detail. So again, highly recommended if you haven't. It's 9 hours, 9 hours of CEUs. So that's a pretty cool thing. Uh, and they also have a registry exam, so you can get a credential. You can, uh, let's see. I can't remember if this is exactly what they call it, but I try to shorten their designation because it's too many words in my opinion. But anyway, um, you'll become a registered EDA specialist. So, and yeah, those numbers are a little bit outdated now. I'm sure this is over 700. Hopefully, it's over 800 by now, but somewhere over there. So, this is an exam that you can take for free. Both of these things will require an account with AIHA, but do not require you don't have to be a member. They do not require membership. So, anyone can sign up for these so long as you have an email address. There's two sections to this exam. It's about 70 questions. If I can do it, you can do it. I promise it. It's not, it's definitely doable. If you go through the course, you do the practice exam that they have, review it, then take the exam. You should do well. So we have our results and we've compared with the OEL, and that's great. We should always do that. We should also get in the habit of doing exposure decision analysis. Now, sometimes when you're a consultant, you wonder if, should I do this? And I actually, I've had questions. I have a gentleman who asked for, so he's asked me questions and asked for advice with his own consulting. I recommended doing this, but because I don't think really has the opportunity to build up what I would call an exposure profile. So he's not returning to these sites regularly. He's not really building a data set of exposures for these people. Doesn't really feel the need to do this. That's fine. I think that's fine. I like to be able to lean on it though, and it's sort of a CYA thing, a little bit, in my opinion, but also to say, look, I'm using these tools developed by people smarter than me. I'm using a process developed by people smarter than me. This is what they recommend. And so I do the analysis so I can point to that and say, hey, look, this is what they say that we ought to do about this. So I think you ought to do this, in your situation. Anyway, um, I like to do it. So if you would like to follow along, then you can. That's a QR code that'll take you to ExpoStats, the Express edition. That would be on your phone. So if it's on your phone, it will look something like this. There'll be this little caret in the upper left that you can tap on to open and close a sidebar. This is the sidebar that will open and close. You have a couple of fields where we're going to enter in data and our results. When you close it, then you can see you can see the results. Let's see. Sorry, gotta check the chat here. I had to do AIJ virtual this year, but I was impressed at how many classes mentioned incorporating stats. Yeah, they definitely. Thanks for pointing that out, Mandy. I Unfortunately, I was at a booth most of the time or presenting, and so I didn't get to see those sessions, but I know AIHA is making a big push, and I think for good reason. For good reason. I do think we ought to make this a standard practice. It is best practice, but we should make it standard practice to use these tools. Because even if we are the consultant and we're not going to come back for a year or 5 years, maybe, uh, it's still it's still helpful in my opinion. It's not necessary, but I think it's helpful. I like to lean on it. I mean, to be honest, but
I don't know if you
it,
can hear me because my
y-
microphone's been a little bad today. Okay.
yep.
Um, and I don't know if this is the correct time to ask this question, but what recommendation would you give to any IHs that work with senior IHs that aren't completely on board with this because they've kind of always done it like one way and you're trying to change things.
Great question. And it's fine to ask questions. So I probably don't have the silver bullet magic answer, but I have. So my PhD advisor was asking me, why, because he's seen that I promoted on LinkedIn and stuff, and he was asking me, why do you do it? Not in a critical way. He wasn't asking that way, but he was kind of curious because he sort of has the same viewpoint of, well, why do we need to do that? Um, eh, and in talking with him, I think I found out the company he works for, they have their own system. It's different, but it's doing something similar. It does use Bayesian, and so that was part of it. I think was that they had a system that was doing some of this the decision analysis. Now their approach in terms of interpreting and their control categories may be different. It may be different, but they had something anyway that was doing using some Bayesian. But my response to him was this was I've shared that what my framing is anyway, and that is that it's the CYA thing. So I want to be able to base well, there's I'm gonna step back a little bit and then come back to that answer, which you've already heard, but I would say, see here, from an operational perspective, if there are two mistakes we could make. We could over or underestimate our exposures. Now, as IHs, I think it's pretty. I think everyone gets this one, right? Um, at least from the IH perspective. If we underestimate, well, then we're putting our people at risk. They may be developing occupational illness. That's bad. And everyone I think, is on board with that one. What now, real quick. So studies have shown that IHs who don't rely on the tools tend to do this one. So we tend to underestimate when we don't use the tools. Now, some will overestimate exposure. Maybe they're trying to be overly protective and more conservative, et cetera, which is great, except that we could all tell them, well, if you're overestimating exposure, yeah, our people aren't going to develop disease, but we are expending resources where we don't necessarily need to. They could be used somewhere else where we have a greater need, a realistic need that is not being addressed. And so that is that's another thing I would bring up, and I'll review my previous answer. But we don't want to underestimate exposure. We don't want to overestimate exposure either. We want to be as accurate as possible, and these tools help us. And the process. It's not just the tools, but it's the entire process. Help us to expend no more resource than we have to maximize our benefit and protection for our people. So that's one way I would frame it. Again, no guarantee that would persuade anyone. And the other is that look, if there are any complications in the future, I can go back and lean on the process and say, I am following the framework that has been established by AIHA, that's being promoted by AIHA. This is what they recommend. And, if you have someone who's smarter, who's better, I'm all ears. Maybe there is somebody out there, but I mean, um, there's always a way to justify a different approach. But it's great to, it feels like a safe harbor to me to use that approach. So anyway, hopefully that's helpful. Um, like I
Oh, it
said, no
is.
guarantees.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I have another IHM. So I work for a workers' comp insurance
Mm,
company, which blows my mind that they would push against this, right? So, but I have another IH that came in from Montana, and he also is pushing to use this. And we're both like, we don't care if it's AIHA, EDA, or Expo stats or IH stats, or let's something because we don't have anything. And so we want something to more, fall back on. Like you're saying, if we're doing this and we have something else to fall back on, especially if it ever goes into litigation too, it's something to, another tool to use. So, but thank you. Yeah, you explained it well.
Well, great question. Great question. And I don't know if I think of another framing, another perspective to share that may be persuasive, I'll let you know. But in the video course, they may mention stuff that I have forgotten that could help make the sales pitch there. Um, yeah. So if you want to do it on your computer, you could use this, or if you just search for Expo Stats, it should be one of the first results. If you do it that way, there might be a couple windows you have to kind of click through, a couple menus to click through. If you do it on your computer, it should look something like this when you get to the Express Expo Stats. So this is that sidebar. You can hide it on the computer, but you have plenty of space. At least on my screen, I got plenty of space. I don't have to do that. I can just leave it open. And I'm gonna actually share mine right now. So, so they used to they used to have their server like updating all the time, and now it sort of freezes out if you're not using it, which I think is smart on their part. It's a little bit annoying, but I get it. They were probably, it's costing them money to have it refreshing all the time. So this is that little sidebar and on the left-hand side of the screen. You see the default was 100. I'm going to put 25 because that's our TLV. And then we had 13, we had 92 and 44 for our drill rig operator. And I'm just going to enter those real quick. If you choose the mode, if you choose the extended, there's some different options you can play with and tinker with. That if you are more advanced and you have a good understanding of what the tool is doing, then I'd say feel free to tinker with that. But for our purposes, we're just going to leave it in the default. The default should be good for most, 98% of scenarios. So I have my 25 and then my three data points, 13, 92, 44. I hit submit. Well, I'm talking longer than I guess we had a good question and answer there, so that's good. It makes me feel less bad. I talk a lot sometimes. So so we've got some basic stats here, descriptive statistics. This quantile plot, we'll take a look at it in just a moment. But first, let's look at the descriptive statistics. A lot of stuff. So here's that geometric mean. Oh, 37.5, just like we calculated on the calculator I'd say by hand in a way. I guess, we're we way past by hand, but anyway, manually on a calculator. So it will do that. Just give us some other interesting stuff here. But what I'm interested right now in looking at is the geometric standard deviation. So I'm not going to go into it right now. That's what the other series is for. But if this number is over 4, it suggests that there's a lot of variability, and we should think about changing up our SEGs. It's not the only thing that we consider, though. So just because this number is over 4 doesn't mean we automatically change things. Luckily, we're not over 4, we're under. And so that tells us, okay, things look good. We're just going to leave the SEG as it is. In this case, it's probably the same worker doing the same task 3 days in a row. I'm sure each day was slightly different. No day is the same, but it's the same worker, same task. So it should be, we should be not too crazy in terms of variability. We're also going to look at the quantile plot. Now, there's no hard and fast rule here. We just want to make sure that there's no significant deviation. And I guess I'm going to use the zoom annotation here. So really, we want to make sure that we're not seeing points way over here in the corners. So if there is the graph even tells us here that, what does it say? Random deviations from it are to be expected. So let me clear that. So there will be some deviation. Sometimes you will have a point that's a little further out, but after you've seen several of these, you can start to tell when it's pretty wonky. I'm using real technical terms here, but when the points they start to not just one point, but you'll have multiple points that have a fair amount of distance from that line up the middle, then you know, then you can start to tell, and you'll start to get points out here in these corners that starts to look funny, and then you have an idea. But again, I would go first defer to geometric standard deviation. So IH stat does test for log normal distribution. That's what this QQ plot is looking at. See, it says log normal distribution. It has a test where there's a threshold. If you want an objective hard and fast line, then use IH stat. I'm not normally too hung up on it whether it's log normally distributed, and so I I like to use Expo stats because I can access it from any computer as long as I have internet. I don't normally look at other stuff below here. There is something down there. It's a box plot if we wanted to look at that. So in terms of stuff to share in my report, I might consider this red box in the upper left. Again, it kind of depends on your client, what you want to convey. The three colors that will show up here are green, yellow, or red. So the traffic light, green, yellow, or red. I would, so I might consider this one. Red tells people, oh, it's bad. And in this case, it is bad. It's telling us here the probability that our decision statistic is above the exposure limit is 100%. We're not going to dive into that. That's what the other course, the series is for, but it's problematic. It's problematic. That's what we need to know. Coming down here, we have this risk meter. This is also another fairly simple one that we could share in the report. Not a bad one. One thing I do worry about this one is that red caret or triangle. People may think that is where our risk is, but it's not. It's our threshold that we don't want to cross. The blue line is where our risk is, and you can see the blue line is we are far in the red. I'm thinking of, we're past the red line and thinking of the RPMs. Oh, it's not the speedometer, but anyway, the what is the RPM meter called? I'm not even remembering. Anyway, we're in the red. We're in the red and by a lot, and it's not good. This exceedance fraction graph, I might include it. That it's not a bad visual. It shows, oh wow, we got a lot of dots above the red line, meaning we're probably going to have a lot of exposures above the exposure limit. It could be confusing. Not sure if I would share, at least in the body, maybe in the appendix. And I like this one. I have gone back and forth on this. It's not as simple as the others or straightforward, but it contains the most information. It tells us the risk that our decision statistic is above the OEL, that probability. It also tells us our risk and control category, our ERCC, which we'll look at. Not a bad one to include, but maybe you don't want a bunch of these in the body of your report. I wouldn't blame you. I've tried different things and I've scaled back on what I include in the body, but I'd probably have this in an appendix or something. And I also, if you want to communicate about the exceedance fraction, I would look at these numbers here. This top one would be considered a 50th percentile, you could say, or it's like the median at 66.4%. That was what was in the figure. You could do a 70% upper confidence limit or a 95% upper confidence limit. I would probably stick with the 95% upper confidence limit, but you could pick. I know companies that they go with 70, and that, they have the rationale. That's fine. You pick one of them to communicate. I'd say if you're going to communicate about exceedance fraction, I'm going to show you how I would word that here. So let me jump back. So that's everything really to look at here. Those are the things that I look at when I do the analysis. So I'm going to hop back to our slides. And we looked at this. We looked at all of that. So this is how I might consider communicating some of these things. The geometric standard deviation was 2.69, and the quantile plot is or appears approximately, I guess you could say, is approximately linear, suggesting an appropriate SEG. Something like that. That's just me. That's not AI or anything. I'm sure there is a better way to word that, but I would say something like that. We also looked at that risk band plot, and that red bar on the far right was really tall at 100%. So there's a 100% chance or probability that the 95% UTL is in category 4. This is something I would want in the report, but if my client is not very technical and doesn't know what I'm talking about, I'm probably not putting it in the body, or maybe it's kind of a footnote. Uh, I might have a footnote that describes what this is, the 95% UTL. So that's not in my body of the report. In the body of the report, I might have something more like this. We're very confident that our exposure, risk, and control category is category 4. This result is problematic. So you saw that slide that talked about acceptability. So that's the statement that answers that question. If it was green, we'd be saying, oh, this is acceptable. If that one box was yellow, then we'd say it's tolerable, assuming we continue monitoring. So those are the different options there. Here is problematic. That was red, very clearly red. And then this is the exceedance fraction at that 95% UCL. I would probably in the body of the report say something like this. We're very confident. Again, I'm saying instead of 95% confident, I'm just saying very confident. And somewhere else, I might have an asterisk, right here that says, down here, 95% or whatever. But when you throw in multiple percents, I feel like it starts to lose people maybe. So we're very confident that no more than 92.3% of exposures will exceed the TLV. Well, that's just great, right? I mean, that's a lot of exposures. That's not very good. I was being sarcastic. Not very good. So we've got a problem, and what we're going to do about it, we'll talk about that more next week. So we did a little bit more thorough review of the case and what we were doing and what we have done. We looked at those results compared with the OEL, some of the typical stuff we do, but then also we looked at exposure decision analysis and some of the things that I've been looking at, and the way I would communicate things. That doesn't mean that that is correct or the best way, but it's a way. It gives you a starting point anyway. If you haven't formed your own opinion on what you should share there. So next, I say next week, but in 2 weeks, and I'm trying to move. We're pretty sparse, I think, because I I shouldn't have cut off LinkedIn quite so abruptly. I want everything to move to the Google Classroom. It's just easier for me to share things there. But anyway, and keep track of resources. In 2 weeks, we're going to talk about that exposure rating and control category for our result and what we should do about it. We'll talk about it in general, but also what we should do in terms of these dowel drillers and how we might help them, help protect them. So and we'll lean on NIOSH as well, but we'll talk about some of the options there. So that's all I have. We do actually have a little bit of time for questions. So what questions do you have? I'm hearing crickets, so I'm guessing, and I can't see on the Zoom chat. If you're typing out a long question, then I can't tell. So I will stick around a little bit, but if you don't have any questions and you feel good about it, then I hope you have a good one and see you in a couple weeks.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Yeah, you too.